That'll be 5. Y'all caught me talking to 0. Hey, listen, I'm so glad everybody's here, the whole one of you that's here. Good to see you, William. I'm not even going to gild the lily. What I'm going to do is, this is for my edification and for others' edification that would come on to the beginning of the stream. We're reading chapter 3 of Moby Dick, and it's the chapter that deals with him going into the Spouter Inn. And then yesterday we read that Ishmael has come to this wonderful place called, hi MC, called the Spouter Inn, and he sees that there's a big bar there that looks like a right whale's mouth, made out of a right whale's bone of his mouth, and there's a little guy there selling deliriums and death, is how he puts it, the whiskey he's selling, named Jonah, and that for a shilling, he'll fill up his cheating glass that tapers down, so if you get the penny measure, it's just a touch, but if you get the whole measure, it's the Cape Horn measure. And so we have Ishmael here, landed in New Bedford and trying to find a place to stay. And he's already looked at this bar. He's seen this painting that is so messed up, he could hardly tell what it was. But after a lot of looking and talking to other people, he figured that it must be a whale jumping over a whale ship, a whaleboat, trying to and impaling itself on the 3 masts. So that's where we find ourselves right now. Ishmael, a guy that's decided to be a whaleman and has never done it. He was a merchant marine, but he's never faced the horrors of whaling, coming and trying to find a place to sleep in the middle of the night. So here he is. He's looked at the bar, and it says this: upon entering the place, I found a number of young seamen gathered about a table, examining by a dim light diverse specimens of scrimshander. This is probably the only definition I'll give. If you don't know what scrimshander is, it's specifically talking about art that a whaleman, not just somebody on a ship, but a whaleman would make, and it's usually made out of the teeth and bones of a whale. I just saw a piece on Antiques Roadshow sell for $75,000. So when he says scrimshander, he's talking about whaleman's art. That's the only definition you'll get today. So if you got others, listen to it, go back, look up the definitions. It'll make you smarter. That's the whole point of this. So they're examining by a dim light diverse specimens of scrimshander. I sought the landlord, and telling him I desired to be accommodated with a room, received for an answer that his house was full, not a bed unoccupied. But avast, he added, tapping his forehead, you had no objections to sharing a harpooner's you have no objections in sharing a harpooner's blanket, have you? I suppose you're going a whaling, so you better get used to that sort of thing. I told him that I never liked to sleep 2 to a bed, that if I should ever do so, it would depend upon who the harpooner might be, and that if he, the landlord, really had no other place for me, the harpooner was not decidedly objectionable, why, rather than wander further about a strange town on so bitter a night, I would put up with the half of any decent man's blanket. I thought so. All right, take a seat. Supper? You want supper? Supper will be ready directly. I sat down on an old wooden settle, carved all over like a bench in the Battery. At one end, a ruminating tar was still further adorning it with his jackknife, stooping over and diligently working away at the space between his legs. He was trying his hand at a ship under full sail, but he didn't seem to make much headway, I thought. At last, some 4 or 5 of us were summoned to our meal in an adjoining room. It was cold as Iceland. No fire at all. The landlord said he couldn't afford it. Nothing but 2 dismal tallow candles, each in a winding sheet. We were fain to button up our monkey jackets and hold our lips over scalding cups of tea with frozen half fingers. But the fare was of a most substantial kind. Not only meat and potatoes, but dumplings. Good heaven, dumplings for supper. One young fellow in a green box coat addressed himself to these dumplings in a most direful manner. My boy, said the landlord, you'll have the nightmare to a dead certainty. Landlord, I whispered, that ain't the harpooner, is he? No, no, said he, looking a sort of diabolically funny. The harpooner is a dark complexioned chap. He never eats dumplings. He don't. He eats nothing but steaks, and he likes them rare. The devil he does, says I. Where is this harpooner? Is he here? He'll be here afore long, was the answer. I could not help it. but I began to feel suspicious of this dark-complected harpooner. At any rate, I made my mind up that if it so turned out that we should sleep together, he must undress and get into bed before I did. Supper over, the company went back to the bar room, when, knowing not what else to do with myself, I resolved to spend the rest of the evening as a looker-on. Presently, a rioting noise was heard without. Starting up, the landlord cried, "That's the Grampus crew. I see her reported in the offing this morning. 3 years' voyage in a full ship. Hooray, boys! Now we'll have the latest news from the Fijis." A trampling of sea boots was heard in the entry. The door was flung open, and in rolled a wild set of mariners enough, enveloped in their shaggy watch coats and with their heads muffled in woolen comforters, all bandaged and ragged, their beards stiff with icicles. They seemed an eruption of bears from Labrador. They had just landed from their boat, and this was the first house they entered. No wonder, then, that they made a straight wake for the whale's mouth, the bar. Then the wrinkled old Jonah there officiating so poured them out brimmers all around. One complained of a bad cold in his head, which upon Jonah mixed him a pitch-like potion of gin and molasses, which he swore was a sovereign cure for all colds and catarrhs whatsoever, never mind how long-standing or whether they were caught off the coast of Labrador or on the weather side of an ice island. The liquor soon mounted into their heads, as it generally does, even with the errantest of topers, newly landed from sea, and they begin capering about most obstreperously. I even have hard times with some of these words. I observed, however, that one of them held somewhat aloof, and though he seemed desirous not to spoil the hilarity of his shipmates by his own sober face, yet the whole he refrained from making as much noise as the rest. This man interested me at once, and since the sea gods had ordained that he should soon become my shipmate, though but a sleeping partner once, so far as this narrative is concerned, I will here venture upon a little description of him. He stood full 6 feet in height, with noble shoulders and a chest like a cofferdam. I have seldom seen such brawn in a man. His face was deeply browned and burnt, making his white teeth dazzling by the contrast, while in the deep shadows of his eyes floated some reminiscence that did not seem to give him much joy. His voice at once announced that he was a Southerner, and from his fine stature, I thought he must be one of those tall mountaineers from the Allegheny Ridge in Virginia. When the revelry of his companions had mounted to its height, this man slipped away unobserved, and I saw no more of him till he became my comrade in the sea. In a few minutes, however, he was missed by his shipmates, and there it began, it seems. For some reason, he was a huge favorite with them. They raised a cry of, "Balkington! Balkington! Where's Balkington?" and darted out of the house in pursuit of him. And if you've been listening, yeah, I'm going to pick it up tomorrow. So we just seen Ishmael went to the bar. He wants to be housed for the night. He was told by the landlord that he don't have any beds available unless he wants to share a bed with a dark complexioned harpooner. And so he decides he's going to sit around and watch, and in comes Balkington. So if this is interesting to you at all, you know, tune in tomorrow for the very beginning, and we'll learn who Balkington is, and we'll learn about how Ishmael meets the mighty and incomparable Queequeg. What's up, Zero? I hope that wasn't too boring. I just want to do a little nerd stuff. I already explained it yesterday, so I'm not going to explain it again.
There's nothing wrong with nerd stuff. I don't consider classic literature that people seem to avoid these days nerd stuff. In fact, I think a lot of things that people don't realize is, even if you pick up a comic book that, you know, I personally wouldn't read, because I think anything since 2016 has really not been my style. I've just been out of that. A lot of literature from the classics gets integrated into modern society through modern mediums of comic book movies and everything else like that. People just don't realize it. In fact, to go on a short little tangent here, that's kind of how I got into reading actual books. Is I'm not much of a reader. I mean, I got to read what I read for work, but that's work. But when I was a kid, I couldn't stand reading an actual book. I was too hyper and I wanted to do everything else. But then one day I discovered, like when I was 13, I got into Metallica. And then I got into Megadeth, and then I realized who they were influenced by, which was Black Sabbath and Iron Maiden. And then lo and behold, I listened to a song on the Iron Maiden self-titled album called Phantom of the Opera. And things started falling into place. I figured out how things were influencing other things, music-wise, book-wise, literature, and all this. And, I learned to actually read by reading comic books. That's how I learned, and that's how I passed school, oddly enough. But that's the classics, nothing wrong with them. And people just, don't realize how much people who really know their literature.
Well, it's funny that you said that, because before we started the stream, you were talking about some things I told you I wanted you to talk about now. So do you feel like your exposure to classical literature, your exposure to the finer things in life that make you think deeply, maybe do help you handle some of the, more aggressive things in life that we talked about?
Oh, absolutely. I think I'm the antithesis of what a liberal is. I'm not a conservative in regards to that. It's not like being a conservative versus liberal, black, white, team red, team blue, whatever. It's having the amount of intelligence you had, realizing that you can always learn more, and not being an egotistical SOB about it, which liberal mindsets seem to have those issues. Now, my uncle, God rest his soul, he would be considered a liberal by today's standards, but he also he had like the first Fantastic Four comic book, the first Amazing Fantasy 15. That's where, my comic book education came out. And one of the things that I've learned is when you're in your 20s, you like to fight, that means you are dumb, overpowered, and undereducated. You've got the muscles and you lack life experience. Now, don't get me wrong. I've probably mentioned that I don't respect MMA or UFC because I've taken Taekwondo most of my life, adult life. And that's a philosophical thing. But there are people in those sports, and yes, I would consider it a sport because you do have to train and be careful.
I don't want to bust your balls, MC, but count to 10 in Korean.
MC's not here.
I'm sorry, I meant 0. Count to 10 in Korean. You know why I asked you. You laughed. That's good enough, sir. And for those listening, I won't press you further. You know why I asked that. I took Taekwondo also, and I've forgotten. But you have to learn an awful lot of Korean to do that art. Continue. So you were saying that you didn't respect mixed martial arts, and when you say the philosophy, just explain that a little bit more before you continue, if you will.
Martial arts is about discipline and self-control. And I wouldn't say that MMA and UFC fighters don't have it, but we also, a purist in regards to martial arts, they'll go to tournaments and they'll practice and they'll show off their forms and their weapon skills and everything. And they'll get a trophy, and and there are people who do the tournaments there and make money off of it, and that's fine. But to us, a lot of people really feel that MMA and UFC is showing off extremely, poor mental judgment about your skills. That if you have to fight in a ring and you have to mix Taekwondo with karate, jiu-jitsu, or capoeira or whatever, then you really should be doing something else. There's only one person that I've ever wanted to meet, because she is a I would call it a multi-genre champion of the martial arts, and that's Cynthia Rothrock. I'd always would want to know what she thinks about MMA and UFC.
Badass, man.
And she's like 60 years old, and she can still kick your ass if she had to.
I wouldn't want to fight her in a timed match.
No, but the thing is, she owns her own. Well, I don't know if it's really changed, but she owns her own dojangs and everything else. And she's a master.
Last I knew, she had the most powerful spinning back kick of any woman on the planet. She has a record of it.
And she's
like 800 pounds of pressure.
Yeah, she's a master in various forms of martial arts, and I can tell you right now, that's something I would always hope my daughter worked up to. But she at least, was understanding that yes, there are women out there who can do that. But if I ever heard, I don't speak for Cynthia Rothrock, and I remember the cheesy 80 movies, but I really love her as a martial artist because she's so graceful. And if she were to ever say whatever she said about, you know, MMA and UFC, I would, and if I didn't agree with that, I'd be like, you know what, that's her perspective and that's fair. I can see where she's saying that. But getting back to that, not philosophical wise, it is a sport. And it is like wrestling. It does take preparation. It does take the physical capability to do so, because you do not want to harm yourself. And it all those things, you know, they are great energy burners. But man,
so among other things, you don't like the MMA's willingness to just get themselves destroyed. You like the philosophy of, hey, I'm gonna strike you in the solar plexus, bam, when you don't see it coming. You're not really hurt. I walk away, nobody's hurt. I actually run away. That's the philosophy. I'm gonna help me understand the philosophy.
Yeah,
side.
And the philosophical side, from what I learned when I took Taekwondo, is you do not go out and try to make money off of this. You do not try to go out and intimidate others. You do not, you know, dishonor the 5 tenets of Taekwondo. You know, and yes, I do. I am very lacking behind on my Korean for the actually counting the 10. And above, to say the least. So I will get you for that.
Oh, good Lord. I had to know block. I had to know high punch, low block, high block, spinning back. I had to know how to say a bunch of stuff that I can't even, man, YK Kim in Orlando, Florida, if I was in front of he had a monkey dude that could fight. I only tried once. I was only dumb enough once. He had a chimp that could, he's still there. He's been in a couple movies too. Anyway, go ahead, because I'm with you on that, even though I've fought twice in my life for money, and it was a penny ante peanut show. You know what I mean? It wasn't like, it was never, I don't want to give anybody the wrong impression. It was at a bar, you know what I mean? And well, it was all legit, but I didn't feel good about that, man. I really didn't.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like I told you before we started, I had been in 3 actual fights, the win, lose, or draw scenario. I won one, I lost one, and I walked away from the other, and so did the other person. We had a draw, but that was before I took Taekwondo. And the tenets of Taekwondo, which are courtesy, which is ye yu, integrity of yam chi, perseverance of ine, self-control, which is guk gi, and the indomitable spirit of bakujul bulgul. And yeah, I'm very rusty on my Korean.
Oh, you're doing great. Continue.
But those are also basic tenets of everyday life, and those are something that you should exemplify, which coincide with respect for yourself and others. Now, that's the philosophical side of why I don't approve of MMA and UFC. But people do that for money when they're in their 20s and early to mid 30s. They're going to do it. I'm not going to stop them, but it really has the mindset of, is this all you can do, is be angry and dumb or lack intelligence thereof, not to do anything else with your martial arts skills? And yes, it probably does sound like to the average viewer that I'm bashing, especially since I said, yes, it is a sport, and yes, it does take training and discipline. But training and discipline of the body and training and discipline of the mind don't always go together, and even though they're supposed to. And I look down at it from purist standpoint. I don't look down at the person for doing it because they can do it. I actually wish I could still